October 14th, 1967, Del Norte County, California. Jack Devlin was a forest ranger with 15 years under his belt, 41 years old. In the fall of 1967, he hiked into the Northern California backcountry looking for a missing hiker, a college kid named Timothy Reese. Jack found the boy's campsite, but not the boy himself. What he did find was something absolutely horrific. Unnatural marks on trees and evidence that something or someone had been watching. He brought back photographs, remains, signs that the forest wasn't empty. This is what Jack Devlin told the sheriff. I signed in at the Smith River trailhead around 7:40 a.m. The sun hadn't crested the canyon yet, and everything still held a wet shine from last night's rain. The Reese boy had logged his entry 3 days before and hadn't signed back out. His car, a dull blue Ford Falcon, sat under a tarp of cedar needles, driver's side door locked, but the keys had been tossed under the seat like he expected to use them again soon. I packed light, water, map, my service revolver, a radio that barely got signal out here, and the usual kit. They told me he was hiking solo, studying the ecosystem for a senior project, and planning to spend 2 nights out. Not a dumb kid, but green. By noon I was 10 miles in, hiking a side trail that hadn't been on maps since '42. That's the thing about redwoods. They shift on you. Trails vanish. Trees fall and new ones come up like ribs out of the ground. The further I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no squirrels, no bugs even. Just the sound of my own boots crunching needles and the wind whispering through high boughs. You notice things like that when you've worked the woods long enough. The forest should be busy with noise. I found his first camp not far from a spring. There was a ring of rocks, a burnt-down fire, and a sock drying on a branch. Looked like he'd moved on the next morning, probably aiming for the ridgeline. I kept on. The next camp was 2 full days hike out. No way he planned to go that far, but the boy was either curious or lost. Around late afternoon, I spotted a bit of bright nylon between the trees. His tent. It was pitched in a small clearing under a thick canopy. Clean job, no signs of panic. The camp stove was still packed, canteen full, backpack zipped. But I stood there longer than I should have, just looking. The air was too still. The way fog clung to the trunks. It felt like stepping into a room where something awful had just been whispered. I called out, no answer. Circled the site, no tracks but my own. Then I noticed the tent's zipper. It was pulled down from the inside. I paused. My hand hovered over my belt for a moment before I crouched and opened it. Inside was tidy. Sleeping bag unrolled, a notebook tucked near the pillow. But the sleeping bag was damp, cold, like someone had been sweating in it for hours. I touched it with my bare hand. Felt wrong, almost sticky. The notebook had no useful entries, just field notes about mushrooms and lichens. But beside it was a camera. Still had film. I packed it all. Didn't like the feel of the place. The tent. I could have sworn it moved just slightly when I stood to leave. Not from wind, from something shifting, slow and patient. I camped half a mile back the way I came. Set no fire. Stayed awake most of the night, listening. There were sounds, but none I could place. Soft creaks high up in the trees, like rope swinging from branch to branch. A pop now and then like a knuckle cracking. No animal sounds, no wind, just those faint snaps and groans. Next morning, I hiked straight out, reached the station by nightfall. The radio had gone dead somewhere along the trail, and I didn't try it again until I saw the lights of the road. The next day, I had the film developed in Crescent City. I expected maybe some blurry nature shots, maybe one of him grinning by a tree. The first 5 or 6 photos were exactly that. Fungus on a log, a squirrel, part of the river. Then it changed. One picture showed the inside of the tent aimed at the flap. A pale shape pressed against the fabric. Vague, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, like someone trying to stand still who never learned how. The next shot was taken just outside the tent. Trees. But behind them, outlines. Dozens, barely visible. Tall things, blurred in motion. The last photo nearly made me drop the strip. A close-up of a human eye. Wide, bloodshot, looking straight at the lens. Not the kids, too old, too weathered, and the skin around it was stretched like leather pulled too tight. That was when I went to the sheriff. I told him everything. He said maybe it was a prank. Maybe the kid ran off. Maybe someone found the camera and played tricks. I didn't argue. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. I still had to go back. Regulations, procedure. But I didn't go alone. We went back in 2 days later. Me, Deputy Sorrell, and a younger ranger named Elliot Griggs. I told them everything on the drive in, but I left out the photo with the eye. Not because I forgot. I didn't. But because I didn't want it said out loud. Like naming it made it stronger. We hiked fast, made it to the kids' last camp by early afternoon. It was just as I left it. No signs of Timothy, no new tracks, but something was different. Elliot noticed it first. The trees around the clearing were all marked. Long scratches, 2 or 3 feet up from the ground, in clean vertical lines, as if something tall and sharp-fingered had circled the camp again and again. Bear maybe, Sorrell said, but I didn't answer. Bears don't pace. Bears don't carve the same mark 12 times into 12 separate trees. We swept the perimeter. About 50 yards from the tent, we found a second site. Someone else had camped there, briefly. A fire had been started, but not finished. There was a length of rope tied from one tree to another, as if someone had tried to string up a tarp and left in a hurry. Blood on the rope. A few small clumps of hair, not much, but enough to feel it deep in your gut. Elliot picked up something near the fire pit. A bone, about the size of a man's pinky. Looked like it had been gnawed. We didn't say much after that. It was Sorrell who spotted the tree. About a quarter-mile northwest of the main camp, in a thick grove where the light hardly reached the forest floor. One redwood stood taller than the rest. That wasn't unusual. But halfway up, maybe 20 feet off the ground, something pale caught the light. We climbed slowly. Sorrell gave me a leg up and I scrambled to a thick limb. The thing nailed to the bark wasn't pale from sun or rot. It was bone. A human jawbone, clean, bloodless, with a few molars still rooted in the sockets. It had been spiked into the tree with an old railroad nail. Rusted, crooked, driven deep with something stronger than a hammer. The bark around it had blackened, like the tree itself was trying to rot the thing out. Below it, at the base of the tree, we found the photographs. They were scattered like leaves, dozens of them, Polaroids. Most were waterlogged and peeling at the edges. A few had faces, blurred, open-mouthed like they'd been screaming as the shutter clicked. One showed nothing but a patch of dirt. Another, a man's back hunched forward in a crouch. The last one I picked up was clearer than the rest. It showed a small clearing, dimly lit, with one person curled on the ground. Around them stood 6 or 7 tall shapes, They had no faces, just pale impressions of heads and arms, long and narrow, like the suggestion of a person without any of the detail. The person on the ground looked like they were trying not to breathe. Elliot stared at the photo for a long time before handing it back. He didn't speak for the rest of the hike out. We took everything, the photos, the bone, the rope, even the camera, filed it all in evidence. Sheriff's office said they'd send it to the state. I never heard back. That night I stayed in the ranger's cabin on the edge of the preserve. Didn't want to go home. I was reading through my report when I heard it. Soft at first. A faint click, then another, sharp, dry, like a camera shutter, from just outside the cabin wall. I stepped to the window but saw nothing. I waited. 5 minutes later, another click, closer. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside. The night was dead still. No wind, no bugs, just trees and silence. Then I saw them. Eyes, reflections, high up, too high for any animal. Not dozens, just two, watching me from between the trunks. Then they blinked, or vanished, I'm not sure which. I didn't go chasing. I went back inside, locked the door and didn't sleep. I filed my final report the next morning and turned in my badge that same week. Nobody fought me on it. I think Sorrel did the same a few months later. Elliot moved to Arizona and stopped returning calls, and Timothy Reese was never found. I've thought about it more than I care to admit. About those things in the photos. About the sound that tent made when I stood outside it that first day. The way the sleeping bag was soaked. Not from rain, but from something leaking out of someone too scared to move. I think they wanted us to find the camera, to take the pictures. I think they wanted to be seen, but not clearly. Like shadows on the wall of a cave. Just enough to remind us we're not alone out here. Not the way we think we are. I don't hike anymore. I don't go near the woods. Not even for firewood. Sometimes I hear that click when I lie down to sleep. Nothing else. Just that small, dry snap of a shutter, as if something is still watching me from just outside the frame. Just waiting. For more scary horror stories like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Thank you.